The first thing that one should do when beginning to read a passage of Scripture is to ask the question, what was the original intent of the author? What was the meaning of what was being written? To whom was the author writing, and what was the message? Besides the context of what we are reading, we should try to understand the type of writing, the genre of the particular book of the Bible that we are reading. I have often compared the Bible to a modern-day newspaper, saying that everything you find in a newspaper, you can find in the Bible. Headlines, advice columns, weather reports, recipes, obituaries. Whenever I say this, inevitably someone says, but there are no comic strips in the Bible. Oh, yes, there is. There is one, the book of Jonah. It is one giant comic strip. It just hasn't been illustrated yet. The whole book is tweaking the nose of the Israelites who want their enemy, the Ninevites, demolished by God. But instead, after just one day of preaching by the reluctant prophet Jonah, they all convert, every man, woman, and child, and they even go so far as to put sackcloth on their cattle. Now, I say all this because this is as an introduction to the problem that we face in today's gospel passage. It is the last of three parables that Matthew records Jesus preaching just before his passion and death. All three parables deal with the end time, the parousia, and they call us to be ready. The problem that the parables present is that when reading them, we have a tendency to allegorize them or apply different meanings to different aspects of the parables, whereas Scripture's commentators tell us every parable has just one overarching message. Today's parable is especially challenging. A very rich man is about to set off on a journey, and he entrusts very large sums of wealth to his slaves, each according to his ability. In no time, the first two slaves double their trust, while the third slave buries his in the ground. On the day of accounting, the master applauds and rewards the two clever slaves, but punishes the third, whom he calls wicked and lazy. He takes the third slave's money and gives it to the first slave. It is important to note from the very start that the very wealthy man preparing to go on a journey and entrusting his possessions to his servants is not a figure of God. And we can see that clearly by his vindictive behavior when he returns and finds that the third servant did not invest his money. Secondly, and almost as importantly, the parable is not an exhortation for people to use their God-given talents to the full, which might be the way we would first be inclined to read it. That is a false application of the word talent, which in this context does not mean ability, as in having the talent for something, but rather it refers to a specific measure of money. And comparatively speaking, it was no small sum of money. One talent could be valued at around $400,000 in today's market. Now, an important key to understanding this parable is to remember that Jesus did not live in a capitalist system in which it is thought that wealth can be increased by investment. Instead, at the time of Christ, people believed that there was limited good. There was only so much wealth, and any increase to one person takes away from another. One who has amassed large amounts of money for himself would be seen as greedy or wicked. Benedictine monk Eugene Hensel writes this, quote, "This parable and the message it contains are not easy for many contemporary Western people to hear. We do not believe that wealth is a limited good. We are committed to a system of capitalism that encourages us to compete and believe that with hard work, we can achieve unlimited wealth." Again, this was not the case in the ancient world. It was believed that all goods already existed and the only way to get more was to defraud another. Wealthy people were already under suspicion, so how could they honorably increase their wealth? They commissioned their slaves to handle their wealth. And since everyone knew that slaves were shameless, dishonorable behavior was all that one could expect of them. The rich man in the story sounds like an honorable person at the start, but by the conclusion we see that he is in fact dishonorable. And the first two slaves did not just honor him, they imitated him. In the parable, then, the third servant did what the rabbis would commend as the safest and therefore most honorable course of action. He is the righteous one, because only he refused to cooperate in the corrupt system by which the master continues to accrue huge amounts of money while others go wanting. The church historian Eusebius saw the problem in this parable, and he repeated a different version from the now lost Gospel of the Nazareans. In this version, the master throws the first slave into prison, scolds the second slave, and welcomes the honorable third slave with joy. Quite a difference. Perhaps this was the version that Jesus actually told. But we ask, what does all this long ago, far away economic structure have to do with us? Well, perhaps it is not so long ago and far away. We live in a world, and indeed in a country, where there is still an immense disparity between wealth and poverty, where a fraction of the population has amassed more than ever can be used or even counted, and where millions struggle simply to survive. We hear the ever-growing popular prosperity gospel that links faith, positive thinking, and material wealth. A prosperity gospel that's becoming increasingly politicized, while at the same time more dismissive of the have-nots. And then there's today's gospel, which might sound like it's presenting strategies for fundraising and developing personal abilities. But we know that this was not the gospel Jesus preached. How can this message be understood and lived as we approach the end of the church year and are called to focus on the end of time? A final insight, again from Benedictine Eugene Hensel, who gives us this correct perspective. Quote, "Christians share their wealth and their goods because they know these gifts are only on loan from God. Contrary to what others think, Christians believe that they receive most by giving more." Or to put it more bluntly, in a question a wise old priest asked me years ago, have you ever seen a U-Haul following a hearse?